In the third part of our Death to the Digital Media Department series, we're turning our focus on online streaming radio and terrestrial radio, and how these two things should integrate in the world of a media. 1. What are the main differences in online streaming radio and terrestrial radio from a consumer's experience? 2. How do those differences affect the way in which we should plan and buy media on both? 3. How does online streaming radio and terrestrial radio work together at reaching a travel brand's target consumer? And 4. What are a few real-world examples on how to implement this integration, and what players in the online streaming radio space should travel brands first be looking? Welcome back to part 3 of our 3-part series, The Death of the Digital Media Department. Here today again we have Bob Frohoff and Alana Patton in our media department. I'm Meliah Cranmer. And here today we're going to talk about how to extend our broadcast extension specifically to online radio and the differences between terrestrial radio and online radio as well. Before we get started, I'm just going to frame up our conversation with a few stats. According to Edison Research, this year over half of the U.S. population will have listened to streaming online music. Also, time spent listening to streaming music has doubled in the past 5 years. At the same time, broadcast radio has actually declined by 26% over the past 5 years. With that in mind, one would assume that broadcast is losing its strength and its reach and its efficiency. However, I think it's extremely important as we start hearing all these headlines about the death of digital radio or broadcast radio specifically, that we need to keep in mind the scale in which broadcast still brings to our media departments. So one thing just to keep in mind is the fact that over 52% of audio listening is still happening on an AM/FM radio station. And when we narrow that down to just adults 25 to 54, which happens to be a lot of our target audiences, 79% of that listening is still happening on AM and FM radio. So with that in mind, I just want to know your perspective on online streaming radio and how that effectively enhances either radio, and what's your opinion on the difference between the two?
Terrestrial radio is more of a group listening experience. When you're listening to AM or FM radio, you're cognizant of the idea that other people are at the party with you. And that's because there's promotional content, there's news, weather, traffic, people call in live to morning shows. So it's not a very lonely experience. Sometimes streaming radio can be very lonely because it's just you there. It doesn't have that news, weather, traffic content. There are generally not a lot of promotional giveaways. That right there is the big difference. Yeah, it's very personalized, but that's also the thrill of online radio, is you get to listen to exactly what you want to listen to.
Right, exactly. I think Bob really nailed it when he said it's you're part of a bigger experience, and I think that's what a lot of people like. They want to be out at the promotions with the DJ, and they want to be interacting at those events. So.
Do you find that there are disadvantages or advantages to one or the other in terms of those different listening experiences, specifically to the media world?
Well, sure. With broadcast radio, you don't get to pick exactly the songs you want to listen to. With digital radio, you don't maybe find out about things like, an impending storm, because you just don't have that live content there.
Are there any disadvantages or advantages specifically to maybe streaming radio?
Streaming radio is really good for narrowly targeting target audiences, or narrowly targeting the consumers we want to reach. Broadcast, again, it's called broadcast for a good reason. It's very, very broad. It's big. Even though radio formats can be very specific, you're still reaching many thousands of people all at once, whereas streaming radio is very much a one-to-one relationship.
Yeah, you are able to layer on a lot of different data to those buys, so that really would enhance, your targeting capabilities. But it just depends on what your goal of the campaign is, I think.
So with that in mind, now that you've established essentially the differences between the two, how do you guys see in a media department those two elements working together, and if that can be a truly broadcast extension play there for radio and streaming radio?
Well, adding digital radio to a broadcast buy certainly does add reach, and also adds, I think, a lot of strong impact because, again, it's that one-to-one relationship. Typically, streaming radio is listened to on earbuds or headphones, which it makes it very high attention level listening. Whereas broadcast radio is often used as background music. Streaming radio or streaming audio services very rarely used as background music.
Bob, you make a great point there with extending that reach to a broadcast spy. I think a lot of times people sometimes make the mistake of just replacing their entire radio buy with, say, Pandora or Spotify or something of that nature. And I think you make a great point that that is truly an extension of your broadcast buy versus replacing your broadcast buy with that. One other question for you guys as far as like online streaming, do you see that your message changes when you move your broadcast to an online streaming, or does it stay the same, or what abilities does online streaming bring to you that may change that message?
For us to qualify it as a truly digital extension of our broadcast campaign, we do want it to be the same message or very nearly same message. So we work really closely with the creative team and make sure that it's a messaging that can go across different mediums and play well throughout.
Do you find that your call to action tends to change between the two mediums?
I think it's typically similar.
Typically similar. The big difference is in streaming music or streaming radio, we don't want 60-second spots. 60-second spots just are really long in that environment, so shorter format.
And they're not even always accepted.
Right.
So it's something you need to work on up front with your creative team.
Yeah.
Integration.
One last question. With the extension of this, a bigger radio space in terms of being online now these days, what are some of the players that you guys think have really started to emerge, or some smaller ones that are really starting to come onto the scene? And which ones would you recommend for any media department to really establish a relationship with?
I think Pandora is an obvious choice. They're able to sell a campaign in GRPs. We're able to look at impressions. They have a lot of different targeting capabilities. So they're kind of an obvious choice, but I think they're definitely a leader in the space.
iHeartMedia has that interesting connection to this huge network of terrestrial radio stations. So matching up their digital product with the broadcast product, it's very strong.
Very impactful.
And Bob, I know recently, over the past few years, you've done something specific with iHeartRadio with Beaches of Fort Myers and Sanibel. Can you walk us through how that kind of worked for you guys?
Sure. The Beaches of Fort Myers and Sanibel has enjoyed the Island Hopper Songwriters Festival. Let me get that out again. The Island Hopper Songwriters Festival for the last 2 years. And that involves a co-produced music festival with the stations that's promoted over the air live, and it's also promoted in a much larger region digitally via iHeartRadio.
And you bring a great point. A lot of times some of our broadcast budgets are large, but then again, we can only reach a certain amount of markets with that. So I know a lot of times our digital budgets tend to reach additional markets with that. So I just want to know your guys' opinion on if you think that's a relevant case study for that, or if you think it needs to be within the same markets per se.
I think it can definitely extend your markets and your reach. I think that's a great way to use your budgets and be more impactful. Obviously we want to continue the same message and have the same strategy and goals, but I think it's a great way to extend your reach.
Well, thank you guys again for joining us today. That is the last part of our 3-part series for Death of the Digital Media Department. I hope that you've learned quite a bit about how to integrate media, and for clients out there, making sure that they're really asking their agencies to be coming forward with an integrated solution across all fronts. So thank you guys again for your time, and we'll see you next time.